I'd like to tell you about two areas of research we've been doing on aging, and why I think they're both going to lead to delaying aging. The first is mitochondrial decay. We became, my interest is preventative medicine. I worked on DNA damage and how to delay it for many years in its relation to cancer. And then I realized that cancer is one of the degenerative diseases of aging, along with heart disease and brain dysfunction, all the things you'll learn about soon enough. And so I got interested in aging, and a postdoc, CHORI Hayden, came to my lab who knew about mitochondria. And if you read the literature, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence suggesting that mitochondria decay, and that's contributing to a lot of aging. And there are about 500 mitochondria per cell, the most complicated organelle in the cell, and basically they're burning your fuel, the fat and carbohydrate, and burning means taking electrons from them, and you add 4 electrons to oxygen, which is the electron acceptor. All the oxygen you breathe in goes through the mitochondria. And that process creates ATP, which powers your muscles and your brain and all your metabolism. You make kilos of ATP in your body every day. So we, rather than trying to work on aging in rats and mice, we decided we'd work on mitochondrial decay, and to the extent that that's contributing to aging, then we could manipulate it without waiting around 2 years till a rat got old. And now all of life is trade-offs. You're adding 4 electrons to oxygen, but if you add them one at a time, you make all these nasty oxidants. And that's an inevitable byproduct of living. Nature's better than most engineers. It's 98% efficient or 99% efficient, but there's always a little bit of oxidant bleeding off, and as you get older, the mitochondria are putting out more oxidant. So it's like an old car engine that has less efficiency and more black smoke. And so we set out to compare mitochondria from old rats and young rats and try interventions, and we tried lots of things, and we found 2 substances that would delay all the assays for mitochondrial decay we had set up. We had set up 4 different areas of mitochondrial function that were known to decay with age, and we could feed between the 2 substances that delayed these. Let's see. This is a blow-up of mitochondria. As I said, there are about 500 per cell. It makes all the energy in the cell. There's an outer membrane, an inner membrane, and the inside of the mitochondria, and then the rest of the cell is out here. And this membrane potential across this inner membrane drives complex 5 here to make ATP, which is the chemical energy of the body. So basically, mitochondria are rechargeable batteries. What this burning process does is it moves electrons all across these complexes. Each of these complexes have hundreds of proteins. 1,000 proteins get shipped in from the nucleus into the mitochondria. The mitochondria have their own little piece of DNA, and they make a few proteins. Anyway, it's very complicated. Lots of Nobel Prizes have been awarded for people who figured all this out. But basically, this process pumps protons across the inner mitochondrial membrane, and that charge across the membrane powers complex 5. And the 2 compounds we came up with were acetylcarnitine, which is a normal mitochondrial metabolite, and lipoic acid, and we're feeding them in much higher levels than you normally get in food, and they worked. It made old mitochondria look more like young mitochondria, and we tested all kinds of aspects of brain function in the rats, and then in mice, and then in dogs, and it all worked. I should put a little caveat in here. The University of California took out a patent on this combination. It's called Juvenon. It's sold over the web. I founded a company with a businessman friend. I put all my stock in a foundation, so I have no financial interest in the company. I don't get any money from the company. But the money's all going to go to science someday. Anyway, so the company is selling lots of these pills. The money goes into clinical trials, and we had a first successful clinical trial and more coming along. And I'm quite excited about that because I think this is one step to make mitochondrial decay complex 4 decay contributes to Alzheimer's, complex 1 decay contributes to Parkinson's, and more diseases of aging are being traced to mitochondrial decay. It's not the whole story, but that's all I'm going to say about that area because that's published a while back, but I want to tell you about my new enthusiasm. You're all aging yourself faster, and I'd like to tell you how to avoid that. And half the world is aging itself faster because they're eating lousy diets. And so, this shows metabolism. One of the companies puts out a big chart with all this metabolism. I somehow managed to get it all shrunk to a little...
I told you I was oversimplifying, didn't I?
So what do you need to run your metabolism? Well, you need energy, and you get that by burning your fat and carbohydrate in the mitochondria. But you need something else. You need about 40 micronutrients from your food. What are they? Well, there are about 15 minerals. So metabolism requires iron and magnesium and manganese and calcium and copper, and there are 15 minerals. You need about 15 vitamins, and those become coenzymes or hormones. And then you need 2 essential fatty acids, omega-3s and omega-6s, and then you need about 8 essential amino acids. So roughly 40. You can argue plus or minus 1 or 2, but I won't go into it. So if you don't get any one of those, you'll die. So you need to be eating a balanced diet. And over the last 50 years, nutritionists and biochemists figured out, we need niacin, and niacin becomes NAD, an important coenzyme that's used in hundreds of enzymes. And so we know how to get enough niacin so we don't die. And British sailors on long ocean voyages, a third of them would die and their teeth would fall out and would get scurvy. And then people realized, well, if they took limes on the voyages and ate lots of limes, then they didn't get scurvy. So the British sailors were called limeys. And then some, vitamin C was isolated. So we've eliminated mostly rickets and scurvy and all beriberi, all these diseases that come from vitamin deficiency, yet we're not eating what the committees think we ought to be eating. The recommended dietary allowance is the RDA, and that's what the committees say we should be getting for each of those. And 2 standard deviations below that is something called the EAR, population inadequacy. So if you're below the EAR, the committees think you're inadequate, but nobody gives a damn because there's no pathology associated with it. And what I'm going to tell you is I think I know what the pathology is. Being low in one of these micronutrients ages you faster. So, and the argument is that throughout all of evolution, animals were running out of one micronutrient or another. The 15 minerals aren't spread evenly in the world. Animals are running out of magnesium or iron or selenium or whatever. And what does nature want to do when you're running out of, if you don't have enough magnesium, so you're going to die? It cuts out any metabolism that's long-term. DNA damage shows up as cancer 5 years down the road, the hell with it. Your adaptive immunity, you die of a more severe infection 5 years down the road, the hell with it. Your mitochondria put out more oxygen radicals, so you have Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, the hell with it. Basically, you're paring down to what's vital, so you can reproduce a little bit. That's what nature cares about. That's the argument. I call it triage. And the first iteration of this was published a couple of years ago, and we keep on finding one example after another, and we're in the middle of trying to test it with people. So the pathology is all insidious. It's the very things that happen with aging. DNA damage goes up with aging, your adaptive immunity goes out with aging, your mitochondria put out more oxygen radicals with aging, and that's what is accelerated by a micronutrient deficiency. That's the argument. I'm a bit of a visionary, so you don't have to believe it all, but I'm going to try and prove to the scientific community all this is true in the years I have left to do science, which is rapidly receding. So this shows what percent of the US population is below the EAR. The EARs is where the committees put a red flag, you're not getting enough. Iron. Menstruating women are losing iron. 16% are below the EAR for iron. And all kinds of nasty things happen when you're anemic. There are 2 billion women and children in the world who are not getting enough iron. Magnesium, 56% of the US population. What's going on here? Where do you get magnesium? It's in the center of the chlorophyll molecule. You eat anything green, you're getting magnesium. So the main source is green things. You eat a big plate of spinach, you're getting a healthy dose of magnesium. The body wants 2 calciums to 1 magnesium, but we're dreadfully short of magnesium because people aren't eating the greens. You get a little from whole grains, and people aren't eating a lot of whole grains. Zinc is in 12% of the population. Zinc's very important. There are hundreds of enzymes with zinc fingers that are turning on and off things. There's copper zinc SOD that's defending against oxygen with P53, which is a zinc enzyme that's mutating half the human tumors, that's coordinating all your DNA defenses. You make a cell a little zinc proficient, you knock out all these things. B6, half of elderly women. Folate, 16% of adult women, and we're adding folate to the flour. And vitamin E, practically everybody, vitamin C, a third of people, and then half the population is low in omega-3 fatty acids, and a sizable percent of the population is low in calcium. You start adding all this up, you wonder whether anybody except Walter Willett is eating the perfect diet. He's the leading epidemiologist on nutrition at Harvard. Anyway, so now, are we talking about 10% of the population, or are we talking about 80% of the population? My own guess is it's going to be a sizable percent of the population. All the poor, all the obese. The obese are eating sugary soft drinks and donuts, and I think they're hungry all the time because their body's craving that missing magnesium, but we'll see. Anyway. So I first got onto this when a cytogeneticist named Jim McGregor came to my lab on sabbatical, and he had just stumbled on the fact that folic acid deficiency breaks your chromosomes, or breaks mouse chromosomes. Folia is a Latin word for leaf, foliage. Folic acid, my mentor at Caltech when I got my PhD back in the early 50s was Herschel Mitchell, and he first isolated folic acid from 4 tons of spinach. So you don't eat your greens, you're not getting your folic acid. Well, you don't have enough folic acid, you break your chromosomes, and I put a graduate student and postdoc to figure, once McGregor came to figure out why. It turns out uracil gets converted to thymine, and uracil is an RNA, thymine's in DNA, same base pairing. But when you don't have enough folate, this pool goes up, this pool comes down, you start putting uracil in your DNA. And then your repair enzymes are always cruising along the DNA looking for uracil because it normally comes from the deamination of cytosine. And if they see one, they clip it out. So you're making nicks and breaks in your DNA from your own repair enzyme, just like radiation. Anyway, and then the other pool of folate up here, methyl tetrahydrofolate, converts homocysteine to methionine, and along with vitamin B12, and there's a cycle here, but you're always making S-adenosine methionine, which is the methylating agent in the cell, and you're always making new homocysteine. Homocysteine accumulates, it's a risk factor for heart disease. So there's a trade-off here. If you have this pool functioning, you don't get cancer. There are 4 or 5 types of cancer associated with folate deficiency, and you break your chromosome. And if you don't have this pool functioning, you get heart disease. Well, both of those come too late in life, and so we wondered whether it wasn't sperm. And we looked, and in fact it was sperm. So if you don't have enough in this pool, not only do you put uracil in your somatic cell DNA, you're putting uracil in your sperm. And so, at least with some arm waving, we're saying, the reason for this polymorphism, where 40% of Northern Europeans, where they're probably chronically folate deficient, increase this pool at the expense of that pool, is because it saves your sperm, which nature really cares about. So anyway, you can wave your arms, and we did all this work. But when McGregor found that this is, radiation gives you clusters of electrons, so it hits DNA bases on both strands. These should be wound around each other, of course. And then normally, and so you get an oxidative lesion from radiation. And what happens is your repair enzymes see this lesion, clip it out, and the other strand's holding it in, and then repairs it. But when you have two nearby lesions, you occasionally get this, the chromosome falls apart. And that's the dangerous lesion from radiation. You have 70,000 or so oxidative lesions just from living. That's one of the trade-offs of breathing in oxygen. And you put 1 million uracils on the newly synthesized strand, you get double strand breaks, and that's what we see. So it's just like getting irradiated. And this is McGregor, who started to look in people, and this is the baseline for chromosome breaks. And he found one guy with huge levels of chromosome breaks, so he was following him for a year. And then he stumbled on this folic acid business and looked to see if this fellow had sufficient folic acid. He was very low, so we gave him a pulse of folic acid, and his chromosome breaks came right down to baseline, and then they started going up again. He just put him on folic acid permanently. And so anyway, when I looked up what % of people were at the level of folic acid where it was breaking chromosomes, it was half the poor. And so I said, hey, that's really important. All this part per billion stuff is all wildly exaggerated anyway, and pesticides really aren't what's giving you cancer. It's deranging your own metabolism. So I put all my efforts into micronutrients. And here's a comparison of X-rays and folic acid by Fenwick in Australia. We did a similar kind of comparison. And this shows iron. We looked at the whole range of iron. Too much iron, and that's a few men eating too much meat, and then 2 billion women and children in the world are not getting enough iron. What low iron does, or too much iron, is it wrecks your mitochondria. So your mitochondria start putting out oxygen radicals, like age. And they're less efficient. If you want to age yourself faster, just be low iron. A lot of menstruating women are doing that. But as you can see, too much is up is bad. Too much of isn't always good for you. Mae West said too much of a good thing, it was wonderful, but I think she was thinking about sex, not micronutrients. So you don't want to overdo things. And we had a review about iron deficiency in the brain. If you don't, the mouse pups don't do well on mouse IQ tests, the rat pups don't do well on rat IQ tests, and kids don't do well in school if they didn't get enough iron. So the brain is 1 trillion neurons and 1,000 connections for each you're making when you're a fetus in the first 2 years of your life. You don't have a good diet, your brain isn't functioning well. So Emily Hohen in my lab was looking at human cells in culture, making them a little zinc deficient. They pour out oxygen radicals, and you get massive DNA damage, and you knock out P53, you're getting a multiple whammy. And we started looking at many micronutrients. In every case, we got DNA damage. And I started thinking, why the hell is nature doing that? And we worked out the mechanism on one of them, which it turns out I don't have time to go through, but anyway. And it had to do with mitochondria, and mitochondria pouring out more oxygen radicals. And this shows a cell that's a little biotin deficient. It just fills up with oxidants. The mitochondria pouring out oxygen, just like they were old. And the human cells in culture age faster. And we've shown this with magnesium, with biotin, with B6. So when you're short of a micronutrient, it ages you faster, at least in human cells in culture. And so this shows magnesium deficiency shortens fibroblast lifespan. And this is DNA protein cross-links you get when you're magnesium deficient. We're talking about half the country. So I looked up on the web, and you find all kinds of micronutrient deficiencies that are associated with chromosome breaks or cancer with the epidemiology. But epidemiology in people is a very iffy science. It's very difficult, and you take everything with a lot of skepticism. The epidemiologist joke is Miami's a weird place. Everybody's born Hispanic and dies Jewish. So you have to always be careful about human studies. But anyway, so the first iteration of our paper on triage, I call it, on the real pathology associated with low micronutrients is aging faster, came out 2 years ago, and now we're working on the second iteration. But it's not only DNA damage and mitochondria putting out more oxygen, but it's your immune system. So if you look up the immune system, what goes wrong with aging, there are 6 things that go wrong with your immune system: CD4, CD8 ratio, androgenic factors, et cetera, et cetera. You look up, has anyone ever looked at this versus a micronutrient deficiency? The literature's out there, and we keep on finding more examples. So I think all aspects of your aging are going faster. So just to finish up, many years ago, we published a paper that low folate deficiency knocked out your CD8s relative to CD4s. Chantal Courtemage, a French-Canadian postdoc, did this. I didn't understand it, but we published it. What does it mean? So anyway, it's an observation. But now I understand it, because that's one of the things that goes out with aging in your immune system. And it's one of the things that goes out when you show them micronutrient deficient. So you're just going to die of a more severe infection. And people in poor countries eating lousy diets are much more susceptible to dying of infections. People knew it had something to do with bad diets, and they said, maybe it's vitamin A or maybe it's zinc. It's any micronutrient. So this says, you're 57 years old, I'd like to get that down a bit. And so I think if all this is true, we're talking about half the world. Micronutrients are dirt cheap. So it's what your mom said, eat your veggies and eat a good balanced diet and take a multivitamin as insurance. But you don't get in all the micronutrients in a multivitamin. You need omega-3s, which you get from deep sea fish. You need magnesium, calcium, and potassium. You make the multivitamin way too big, so you need to be sure you're getting those things. Anyway, but don't overdo it. Thank you.